This is Dada Nanda, also known as the Monk Dude, and this is where I interview people or have conversations with people about love, creativity, and wisdom. And today I have my very good friend Devashish Acosta with me, and I want to tell you a little bit about how we've known each other for decades. We're both followers of Anandamurti, the founder of Anandamarga, so we're following the same spiritual path. And we're also both writers. We've done music things together. Devashish produced my album, Return of the Magic. He earned a few gray hairs doing that, and also helped me a lot editing my novel, Real Dragons Don't Cry. So he's an editor, he's a writer, he's written a lot of books, and he's going to talk to us about the role of writing, or what he sees as the important role that writing can play in social change and other areas in life. So yeah, tell us a bit about how you came to meditation and how you ended up being so passionate about writing books.
Okay, well, first I'll give namaskar, greetings to everyone. Well, I began meditating when I was 18. So just to date that, it's 41 years ago. And I don't want to spend too long on that, but I remember at the time that was the mid 70s, and I was really involved in counterculture, hippie culture at that time. And I was reading a book by Timothy Leary, who really inspired me because he was the father of the psychedelic movement. And, LSD and all that stuff, which I was very much into at the time. So I was 18 years old, and he mentioned Zen in one of his books. I didn't know what Zen was. So I went to the library, I got a book out in Zen. I was in the university at that time. And when I read about it, the very first page, it talked about enlightenment. And it was like a light went off in my head. And I thought, if this is true, if this actually exists, then it's worth dedicating my entire life to it. And if it's not true, I didn't really see what point life had anyhow. So, and then I turned the page, and the next thing it talked about, well, if you want to achieve enlightenment, you have to meditate. And I thought, oh, okay. Well, I didn't really know what meditation was, but I remembered I had seen some poster advertising some meditation class in the student union. So I went down there looking for this poster, and there were two posters side by side. One was Transcendental Meditation, and I think it was $35 for the class. And right next to it was Anandamarga, and it was free. So that basically decided which direction I was going to go, right? So there was a monk, that was I think a Wednesday, and there was a monk arriving 2 days later to give a talk on meditation and to teach people. It was Dada Rudranath, who now lives not so far from here in Miami. And so I went to the talk, and he would come every 6 months. It just so happened. Of course, nothing just so happens. Everything follows the law of cause and effect, right? But he was there at that specific time when that light went off in my head, and I went there. I listened to his talk. I didn't really listen to the talk. I just wanted to get to the end so I could ask him to teach me how to meditate. So I remember he talked about meditation and the waves of the mind, and the mantra, like having an infinite wavelength and gradually calming the mind through that. And it was interesting, but all I wanted to do was learn how to meditate. So afterwards I went up to him, and the next day he taught me meditation. I went from there. And at the time I was really into music. When after that year, I actually dropped out of college and went to do a full-time yoga training with Anandamarga. And the only thing, I sold all my possessions to get some money except my guitar. So that was sacred, right? And so for the next years, my primary artistic pastime was music, and I would write a lot of songs in those days. And but as I was writing songs, I started getting more and more into the lyrics. And I always loved to read poetry. I started writing poetry and trying to improve my lyrics, and that gradually got me interested in writing. The more I read, the more I got interested in it. And I think the watershed moment came when, in my late 20s, I was in music school, for the second time. And I started taking courses in creative writing, and then applied to a graduate degree in creative writing, got accepted. And since that time, gradually, I shifted basically into being a writer, and the music as a hidden desire behind the writing.
You did a pretty good job producing my album. I mean, you didn't get to play on it. Oh no, you did. I think you played.
I play guitar on one track, and
that's right.
I probably forced myself onto that track just to.
Yeah, I think you did, and you wouldn't let me play guitar on my own album. Remember?
Yeah, that's true. There was a reason behind it. You needed into that.
I was allowed to sing, but you still had some confidence as a musician. But yeah, you've mostly been writing since then.
Yeah, since then, exactly.
Great, and you've actually got a degree in creative writing, so that kind of qualifies.
Yeah, I have an MFA in fiction, which is supposedly in the States is equivalent to a doctorate in because in the creative fields like writing, painting, music, they don't hand out PhDs. They only hand PhD is like a scholarly degree. They hand out MFAs, but you have to do 4 years to get it. So that was a fun time. I landed really with no experience as a writer. Got accepted into an MFA program and somehow learned it was either sink or swim in the beginning. And, I started going to classes and people talking about deconstructionism and all this stuff and about authors I had never heard of. And I had to learn quick. And it was a challenge, but it was fun. Yeah.
So I've read most of your books. I want you to give us.
You haven't read all of my books? Oh my God!
Well, there's quite a few of them.
Yeah.
So let me see if I've got it right. There was. Let's start with the novels: Felicitavia, The Ashram,
right?
Davy,
right?
The Land of the Taino, The Song of the Taino,
Song of the Taino, right?
And Jazzmaster, and in the Land of the Saints.
Well, you got them all.
Okay, so those are the novels. And then nonfiction, When the Time Comes, it's Conversations with Dada Chandranath, the Jamalpur Years. And then you edited some other books, but I think...
Yeah, and I was also the ghostwriter for one book.
Right. Okay, so that's, what's that, 6 and 8 books?
That's 8 books under my name. So the real question is, which of those didn't you read?
I shouldn't admit this, but I didn't finish Davy, and I didn't finish The Song of the Taino.
Okay, well, you're forgiven as long as you put it on your agenda for finishing them at some time.
I will, and I really enjoyed your newest book. Well, I haven't actually quite finished yet because I only got it last week, but I'm well into that, and I think it's my favorite of the fiction books. I think it's my favorite, and that's partly because it's about stuff that I'm very interested in, very passionate about myself. I mean, but I want you to tell us quite a bit about that because some of your readers are going to be listening and they want to know what your new book's about, and of course they should all buy a copy. Yes.
Well, it's also my favorite because as the subject matter is something that is close to your heart, it's also very close to my heart.
But why don't you tell us about the evolution? Let's look at your novels. Let's focus on that. Just very quickly, just tell us the evolution of those 6 novels and why it's, and maybe just a sentence about each one so people know what sort of subject matter you... Well,
my first novel, which was written shortly after I got out of graduate school and was still very much a novice, in the art form, it's about a painter who goes into the Alps and has an unexpected mystical experience while he's painting there, and then encounters a spiritual community where art serves as a vehicle for spirituality.
Yeah, I remember I enjoyed that. Felicitavia, right?
Felicitavia, right. And that was, I was really getting deep into this whole idea of artistic expression as a vehicle for spiritual growth, or as a conduit to spiritual growth. And that book was really about exploring that aspect of spiritual life, the artistic, aesthetic science. Of course, that's been a rather predominant theme in others in my book, but that was the principal focus of that book.
Yeah. Then the ashram?
The ashram set in California. It's a young California yogi, and part of it's a little bit about the contrast between the California New Age scene and the yogic scene as it comes from India, you know, and going back and forth, and it has a lot to do with service also, which is not always so much a part of the spiritual scene in California. So, you know, I lived for a number of years in California, and yeah, I enjoyed writing that.
Well, I live in California now, so I can tell you that, I mean, there is a lot of real spiritual practices and schools in California, but there's also quite a lot of commercialized.
Right, and at the time that I wrote that book, which is, you know, maybe a dozen years ago, so it was very true then, as it's true now.
Yeah, and then next was Davy.
Yeah, Davy was the idea came to me in India. It's basically 3 plots interwoven. There's a writer who goes to India. He's not a spiritualist when he goes there, but he becomes a spiritualist, and there's the plot of his spiritual awakening. But that's interwoven with these recurring dreams he has, and also the book that he's writing. And you get different scenes from the book. So the 3 interwoven plots, and they all kind of come together. And what ties them together is there's a play of karma going on, cause and effect, that ties the 3 plots together. And it has something to do with the main character's past lives as well as their present lives.
Yeah, I'm actually motivated to read that one and finish that one. I started it because I was enjoying it, but I got, I don't know, distracted by something.
You get sidetracked by life, right?
Yeah, right. But I'll go back to that one. I've got it. It's in my shelf. And then the Song of the Taino. This one I don't think I've seen.
Oh, I should have shut off this phone.
Yeah, kill the phone.
Let me unplug it. Okay, that should take care of that.
Good. Okay.
Song of Taino is about the conquest of the Spanish conquest in the late 15th century. Starting with Columbus, the Spanish arrived in the New World, first in the Dominican Republic, Haiti, the island of Hispaniola, and then Puerto Rico. And basically, that led to the greatest genocide in human history. They wiped out the Taino Indians, which were the first Indians that they met, and that were living in those particular islands, and the genocide spread from there. So that book is basically about one of the great tragedies in our human history. And it does have, as an ancillary plot, a little look into the spiritual life of the Tainos, which is something that basically disappeared from our planet due to that genocide.
Right, and you're one of your parents is from Puerto Rico, right? You lived
Both
there.
of my parents are from Puerto Rico.
Oh, they're both from Puerto Rico. Okay.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. So you probably have Taino blood.
Yeah, over 2/3 of Puerto Ricans have Taino blood. Yeah.
Okay. Then the Jazzmaster.
The Jazzmaster is a story of a young musician, jazz musician. It's my favorite music and what I studied when I was in music school. It's also set in California. And he's going to school at Berkeley, which is not far from where you are. Going to music school there, and he meets a black jazz musician who becomes his mentor. But he starts off as his musical mentor, his jazz mentor, but he becomes a spiritual mentor because this particular musician used to be a Zen monk in Japan. And the story takes off from there. So it's
a great character, this guy Elijah.
Elijah, yeah, and that's the present book in the Land of the Saints is the sequel to the Jazzmaster, and it takes place 22 years later.
Right. So this is really interesting. Where you know the first part, you start with the American character Daniel, and he sort of reconnects with his mentor in India. But then you hear the story of Elijah and what's happened to him for the last 22 years, and that's I'm pretty far into that, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, he didn't know, he had lost contact with him.
Yeah,
and so he didn't know what was going on, and then it sort of in a what I think an interesting way, he finds out where he is, and he learns that he's in India, and then he goes there to meet up with him.
And he meets these great spiritual personalities. I mean, as you said to me the other day, we're talking about, you said all the characters in the book are real historical figures, except for the protagonist and his friend.
Yeah, well, that's debatable because, you know, like, for example, there's a scene in the book where Elijah and Dan, Chitkanananda, one monk, real guy, no longer living, but an old friend of mine, took him to this Tantra pit. Tantra pit Tantra pit means seat of sadhana. It's a place where a yogi in the past has attained enlightenment, and it becomes like a power spot. And if you meditate there, it really helps your meditation. The vibration, like, you know, the Bo tree with Buddha attained enlightenment. And so Chitkananda took me there on several occasions to meditate, and I had very powerful experiences. I was like 20 at the time. Now, I didn't notice Dan or Elijah sitting there also meditating with us. But now as I look back after writing the book, I just think, well, maybe they actually were there and I just didn't notice.
Some people wonder about the sanity of artists getting a little carried away with thinking their stories are real.
Well, if we get into talk about, you know, what is reality, then that line becomes very blurred. And maybe we'll get there depending on how much time we have.
Okay. So let's have a look at what you're actually trying to do with your writing. So you've written 6 novels in the nonfiction as well, which are, you know, essentially spiritual biographies. So what role do you think this kind of writing, spiritual fiction, let's call it, has in society? What good is it?
Well, of course, that's debatable, right? You know, why we spend so much of our time, a writer like me, making up stories. But in my website, I use the model spiritual fiction for social change. And the reason I use that model, one, is because the importance of social change. And secondly, because I do really feel that fiction, especially spiritual fiction, and I can explain why, can play a role, and at times a significant role, in in furthering the evolution of our planetary culture. So first, let's start off with why. I think we all agree about the necessity for social change. So we live in basically a fragmented, fractured society where injustice is, it's so rampant virtually everywhere in the world. I remember when I was a young man, going back, say, around 40 years, I was getting into meditation and spiritual practices, and my social consciousness was becoming expanded, becoming awakened. And I remember reading a newspaper article, and it said that at that time there were more than 20 different wars going on in different parts of the world. We can call them armed conflicts, some large, some small, but that's just a euphemism for war. But the point of the article, it was going back in recent memory. It said, actually, there's never been a time in recent memory where there hasn't been around that, at least that number of wars going on, people picking up weapons and killing each other over land or over religious beliefs or political or nationalistic dogmas. That was just the state of human society. And if you think about it, that is totally barbaric. There is no conceivable reason in a sane society for human beings to pick up weapons and kill other human beings. I mean, it's just for not even an enlightened consciousness, just for like a little bit evolved consciousness. This is totally insane. It's unthinkable. So I think there's no question that this is an indictment of our planetary society. There's no question that we still live on a very primitive planet. As long as that kind of violence still exists, as long as racism exists, as long as women are second-class citizens in many parts of the world, as long as religious intolerance and religious fundamentalism holds such a moral sway over the minds of so many millions of people, and let's throw in nationalistic fundamentalism, political dogmas, all those things. As long as that is the state of our planet, we can't claim really to have a society worthy of the name. In Sanskrit, this, The word for society is samaj. And samaj, literally, etymologically, it means to move together. And implicit in that, the sense of the understanding of samaj is to move together as one family. Where you can't, no one lagging behind. So we, in that sense of the word society or samaj, we don't have society worthy of the name. Yes, we've come a long way. If you think back 500 years, 700 years, you look back in centuries, well, we've come a long way since, say, the Middle Ages. When popes were ordering the massacre of whole villages in France, and over in Spain, you had the Spanish Inquisition. Right. And life expectancy was half of what it is now, and you had epidemics, decimating whole populations. At that time, and I researched this when I was doing my research for Song of the Taina. Most Europeans believed that the end of the world was close at hand. And the driving force behind that belief wasn't theological, for the most part. It was experiential. It was because life for most people in the Middle Ages in Europe was a living hell. And if you read about what life was like, it was a living hell. And so what they saw with their own eyes was a world on a one-way track to destruction. So it was very easy for them to believe. Of course, I live in hell. Things can't go on for very long like this. So things have gotten a lot better than they were, that number of centuries ago. And they go back 10,000 years, 20,000 years, 30,000 years. Clearly, as a human race, we're evolving. We're making great progress. But still, we live in a primitive society, and we have great social challenges to overcome. And until we overcome them, until we have a planetary culture where social justice is a given, where basic human dignity is a given for each and every human being, then it's our collective responsibility to work to overcome those challenges. And so, everybody does this, and can do this in their own way. For a writer of fiction, which is sometimes a dubious métier, a dubious profession. But we have a responsibility through our art, those who are artists, to try to make the world a better place. So how can fiction fulfill that role? So that I think that's the question that I want to address. So I was at Didi Mitra's place last year at a retreat. That's a spiritual community in Brazil, in the Brazilian countryside, a couple hours from Sao Paulo, and you've been there. Maybe some of our other listeners have. It's a wonderful place. I like to think of it as the spiritual Disneyland of South America. Yeah, I mean, it's
have you told her that?
Maybe, I don't remember, but it's one of the coolest places on earth, in many respects. So I was at this retreat, and there was the head of the Department of Nephrology at Sao Paulo University, which is considered the most prestigious, Sao Paulo Medical School, considered the most prestigious medical school in South America. Yeah. And he has been doing research on the effects of meditation on the brain, on various medical conditions, and it was a fascinating lecture. For example, according to his statistics, more than 30% of doctors now are prescribing meditation as a remedy for high blood pressure, for depression, for so many different ailments. So this is all fascinating, but at some point he mentioned that a study that stories, listening to stories, consuming stories, watching them, reading stories, reorganizes the brain, improves brain functioning.
Wow.
Increases empathy, increases the secretion of oxytocin, which is known among medical researchers as the love hormone, or sometimes the moral molecule. And it was fascinating, you know. And the main researcher in this field is Paul Zak, Z-A-K. So if you're interested in those studies, go and read. I mean, all that information is available on the internet, and it's fascinating. I'll get in a second. You know, I'll get into, you know, how stories actually improve our brain functioning and, you know, increase empathy and all these things. But think about it for a moment from the point of view of our experience when we get into a story. What happens? So, you know, we're reading a story, for example, maybe in the movie theater watching. Let's take the movie theater for now, you know, because that's a lot of our stories nowadays come from movies and television. And, you know, as we get into the story, what happens is we lose sight of where we are. You know, we forget we're in the movie theater, or we forget that we're reading a book, and we get totally absorbed in what's going on screen, or in the case of a book, on the screen, the inner screen of our mind. And automatically, when we get pulled into a story, we start identifying with the characters and what's happening to them. You know, a character, you know, is you know, walking toward this closed door, right? And the assassin may be on the other side of that closed door. Or maybe it's a ghost, depending on the type of movie. And what happens? Our heart starts beating faster, you know. We start sweating, we start feeling the tension. All these emotions get set off, you know. And at the same time, we're seeing the images, even if it's in a book, we're seeing them inside and hearing the sounds, and our senses get activated, right? And we get sucked into the life of the characters in that scene. And it's very impactful, you know. You can people have heart attacks in movies, right? Not very often, but you know, it can happen. You remember that movie by Woody Allen, The Purple Rose of Cairo?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what happens in this movie? You know, a character comes off the screen at a certain point. What is he trying to say there? He's saying that a story, in this case the movie, the sense of identification becomes so powerful that the characters become real for us, right? That's, you know, the basic conceit behind the movie The Purple Rose of Cairo, the power that a story, in this case a movie story, can have over the human psyche. Now, what the studies have shown says that when you absorb information, facts, you know, you listen to a lecture, you listen to me speaking, right? I'm not telling stories, just facts here. You know, certain centers of the brain, basically left-centered brains, get activated. But when you listen or read a story, it's like the entire brain lights up. Why? Because all these different sensory centers in the brain, you know, these sensory cortices, motor cortex, olfactory, visual, all these things, due to association, they start becoming activated. And even more importantly, the emotional centers of the brain become activated, and the emotion is a neural activator by itself. So those are the main points. All the senses get drawn in when you're drawn into a story, and the emotions start flowing. And what they found, and the one more point they made, is that we're totally, our mind is like programmed to be totally familiar with the narrative structure. Stories have a beginning, have a middle, and an end. And for that reason, they're totally familiar to our experience as a human being. So the confluence of all this activity, you know, they're studying it in terms of the brain. These stories have a tremendous impact on our brain and on our minds that mere fact cannot do. Listening to a lecture cannot do. You know, reading a nonfiction, unless it's written in form of a story, it doesn't have that kind of impact. It doesn't create that kind of motivation. Interestingly enough, even before they started doing this research on how stories affect the brain, the marketing people had already done a tremendous amount of research on that. And they were teaching to use stories in marketing campaigns. Why? Because stories are much more effective for inducing behavioral change than facts are, than mere information is, mere discursive language. they create much more of a sense of motivation. And of course, in marketing, the people are using it to sell products, which is maybe not the most purest, most pristine use of the storytelling art. But the point is that stories are much more impactful than mere information, mere discursive language. Okay, so the thing is, can we take a commercial break for a second?
Yeah.
Is that allowed? So I could just run out to the bathroom real quick, be back in 60 seconds, and you can entertain.
Well, I'm going to tell everybody a little story to give them an example.
That's a good idea. I'll be right back.
Okay. One of the biggest areas of marketing, certainly in America, I live in America, is politics and elections. It's huge. So we've got this election campaign going on, and these elections here, they go on for months, a year, more than a year up to the presidential election. So we've got these different candidates here, and I can't vote. I don't, I'm not a citizen here yet, but I live here, and I'm seeing this all the time. And there was this really classic moment where, Bernie Sanders, who happens to be my favorite candidate, he's up there, and he's talking about all his programs and his policy proposals, and they're important. But then this little bird turns up. He's talking to 20,000 people. Huge, he's filling stadiums every week, every day, just about. So it's very popular. And he's sitting there giving this talk about his, political policies. And this little bird, was a finch, comes and lands just next to the podium. And all the people in the crowd, they say, "Oh, this little bird, that's kind of cool." It's right next to him. And then he's just saying something. He sort of turns to the bird. And he says, oh, the bird doesn't understand what I'm saying, but, it kind of seems to like it here. And then the bird hops up right on the podium. It's right in front of him. It's a foot away from him. And the crowd goes crazy, okay? So the bird, and what it is, it's a story about how this little bird who is, a bird can't speak for itself, but what the bird did by coming up right next to Bernie Sanders said much more than he could say with all his words. Because it's a story about trust, about how the bird is saying, well, this man is not going to do me any harm, and everybody, felt that tremendously, that the bird had kind of said what they wanted to say. So even though the bird can't speak, it was telling a little story, and that had more power than anything else he said that night. And it went completely viral. It's become like an emblem of Bernie. They call him Birdie now.
I didn't catch the beginning of the story, but I think I got the gist, right?
Yeah, you should take a look for the video. Bernie with the little bird coming up, sitting next to him while he's giving a speech to 20,000 people. It made a huge impression.
Yeah. So the thing is, as human beings, we have an insatiable hunger for stories. And we've been, ever since, we gathered around campfires so many thousands of years ago to hear the story of the hunt, whatever, we have an insatiable hunger for stories, whether we consume them through television, through movies, through pop songs, through novels, just hanging around the water cooler, if people still do that in businesses, and telling about what happened on the weekend. Gossiping, people sitting together at home and gossiping. What do we do when we get together as human beings? Mostly we tell stories, and we have an insatiable hunger for that. And that hunger for stories points to it is my contention, it points to a fundamental truth about human psychology that you're not going to get in these studies about how stories affect the brain. And that is that we human beings interpret our lives as a story. It may be a tragedy, maybe a comedy. In almost all cases, it's a little bit of both, depending on what side of the bed you wake up on any given day. But it's a narrative. Human life is a narrative art. It has a beginning, has a middle, and has an end. And like all good stories, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know where it's going. And that's what creates the tension. That's what creates suspense. Is what keeps us on the edge of our seats. So, for example, you have a pain in your abdomen or in your chest, right? So you go to the doctor's office and he said, well, we got to take some tests. Don't worry, but, we got to do a few tests here, just rule out some things. So they do some tests, maybe a biopsy, CAT scan or whatever. I'm not a doctor, but they take those tests. And for the, you know, and the test results are going to be ready in a week. And for that week, you know, I mean, the suspense is killing you. You don't know what's going to happen to you. You know, it could be bad, it could be good. That is like a short story. That is a short story. It's a scene in a novel. It's a short story in itself. It's the essence of, you know, the narrative art. And I'll take it one step further. I would argue that it's this sense of a narrative flow that gives our lives meaning. That the modus operandi of the narrative art is the search for and the gradual unveiling of meaning. Yeah. So what role does the story play? You know, consuming stories play in this process? A story for me is like a mirror. You know, if you want to see your own face, it's very difficult. You know, unless you have a mirror, it's almost impossible, right? So in the narrative, when we see stories, read stories about other people's lives, we see reflected in the mirror of those stories our own struggles as human beings. You know? We see how the ways that we might be able to overcome the challenges that we have to face, which after all, the same challenges that everybody has to face, or how those challenges may overcome us, which is the flip side of the very same question. So those stories are an education for life. That, you know, what everybody else is going through in those stories is what we go through in our own lives. And it's in those stories that have come, you know, that we start consuming from infancy, that we get the life lessons that we need to progress on the path. Now, I personally, you know, I take it one step further. You know, I would say that it's not simply that we interpret our lives as a story. It's not, you know, this is not simply some kind of arbitrary perceptual schemata hardwired into our brain. I would contend that our life is a story. It is a narrative. That the underlying narrative of human life, in fact of all life, and I would argue the inanimate world as well, is the awakening of consciousness. It's this process which starts in the quagmire of ignorance and culminates in the attainment of enlightenment. It's the story of the living being's journey out of darkness and into the light. That's what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey. I think you're quite familiar with that, right? And that's what most of Hollywood stories are based on. Now,
so the story is a reflection of something more real. I mean, of life itself.
Of life itself, exactly. The story is a reflection of life itself. And the fundamental truth of the human journey, of human life, is the awakening of consciousness. And if we really go into what we see in all kinds of stories, what we're really seeing, what really attracts us, is that reflection we get of the awakening of consciousness. It may be social consciousness. You know, you see in so many stories nowadays, you see the social consciousness of the protagonist becoming awakened due to the force of the situation. Well, that awakening of social consciousness is, I would say, is a reflection of spiritual consciousness. It's consciousness awakening, you know. So, but fundamentally, the awakening of consciousness is a spiritual process.
So when you're studying writing, you know, always you learn about character and everything about character arc. They want to see, okay, how does the character grow from the beginning of the story to the end of the story as a result of going through those experiences? That's what makes the story. That's what makes a story good. And the writer's job is to make that clear, what they learned, how they grew. In other words, in your terminology, how their consciousness evolved through the story.
Exactly. So this drama is the universal drama of awakening consciousness, and it plays itself out in each and every living being. You know, so that's why I say that life itself is a narrative art, you know, that by its very nature. Mm-hmm. And for me, you know, one of the most interesting things, now we'll go off on a highly spiritual tangent, is that as our consciousness awakens, we gradually come to realize that everyone else who shares this planet with us is making that very same journey. Wow. as we realize this and we start to feel that affinity that they're sharing the same path that we're walking, that each and every being on this planet, and I won't limit this to human beings, is our brother and our sister. And you don't pick up an Uzi and blow away your brother at the dinner table because they took the last piece of pie, which is sort of what's happening, on certain levels on our planet, right? This sense of social consciousness comes from the realization that we're all walking the same path towards the same destination. That is what makes us brothers and sisters. And if you'll permit me, I'll take it just a little farther out. As our consciousness awakens, we start to realize, to recognize, I would say this is the fulfillment of the awakening of social consciousness. We eventually come to realize that everyone around us is not merely our brothers and sisters. They are our very own selves looking back at us through another pair of eyes. You think about it. People say that eyes are the windows of the soul. So what do we mean by that? What is it we see in another person's eyes or another living being's eyes that so attracts us? It's not, I will contend, it's not the thoughts and the feelings that we see reflected in their eyes. We may think it is, but no. It's the consciousness behind those thoughts. That consciousness that is within us, witnessing our thoughts, that consciousness that really is the goal of our spiritual journey, we see it reflected in the eyes of the people around us. And consciousness is one and indivisible. Consciousness is infinite, eternal. It's the universal soul that we've been searching for since before we were born. And we see it reflected all around us in a myriad of disguises. So I'm curious, I'm taking it way out there.
No, I think that's it's quite logical and pretty far out, but it's quite logical.
Yeah.
So, and it's how it explains why we feel the way we do about other people, especially people that we're close to, because we're very aware that they are self-aware. So in other words, we see ourselves in them.
Exactly.
Therefore, they matter to us.
That self-awareness, which is really the goal of our spiritual journey, we see it reflected in other people. And that's the source of that attraction.
And so that's got something to do with love.
It has everything to do with love. But it also has something to do with spiritual fiction. So, we started out with this question by, talking about how fiction can be a positive force for social change. There's, I don't know if you know him, there was a great American poet, Wallace Stevens.
I know, isn't he the one who wrote about the kingdom of ice cream?
Yeah, the Emperor of Ice Cream.
The Emperor of Ice Cream, that's right.
Yeah, a great poem about the transitory nature of existence. So he has a classic poem that's called Notes Towards a Supreme Fiction. It's one of his late poems. His late poems were absolutely, totally mystical poems. The last poem that he wrote, they think, which they found after he died, it starts out like this: the palm at the end of the mind beyond the last thought rises. It's a poem about consciousness. And another of his late poems is called The River of Rivers of Connecticut. And I actually have it here because I wanted to be able to read it. No, I lost it. It's not there anymore. Anyhow, it's, this amazing poem about consciousness. So he called it, this poem, Notes Towards a Supreme Fiction. So I want to replace supreme fiction with spiritual fiction. So what, to me, spiritual fiction is, and it's the same thing that he was working towards in his poetry, is that storytelling which reflects back to us our spiritual journey. That storytelling which holds up a mirror not to some limited aspect of our life, but to our journey as a whole, to the supreme narrative of our lives, the journey of awakening consciousness. Fiction that acts as a mirror in which we see reflected the ultimate meaning of our lives set against the backdrop of this magnificent universe. So, and naturally, as our spiritual consciousness becomes awakened, automatically our social consciousness becomes awakened, which I think is why all sincere spiritualists are also activists. So if it is true, as the scientists have proved to us, that storytelling is the most profound means of impacting our lives, not fact, not nonfiction, but fiction, which probably explains why 70% of the books sold on Amazon are fiction, and all the other categories occupy the other 30%. It's, because we have this insatiable hunger for stories that teach us about life. And the most impactful teaching, is spiritual teaching. I remember I was in India recently in November, and I was with Devashish Acosta, and he was talking why he pushed his son to go to medical school. He said one time Baba, our guru, Anandamurti, told him that the most important role that in life is that of spiritual teacher, but the second most important role is that of a doctor. The role that does the most service is that of spiritual teacher, and the second most service is done by doctors. So the idea, my idea about spiritual fiction is if somehow, my books or anybody else's books, whether they're Hermann Hesse's, or Richard Bach's or any of the other writers who write spiritual fiction, can have, can impact our minds in a way that we become more conscious, to help our consciousness awaken spiritually, then that automatically, by helping us to become more enlightened beings, is going to change the planet.
Well, both of those writers had a big impact on me. I mean,
yeah.
Huge.
God, I mean, Hermann Hesse.
Yeah, and even Richard Bach, Illusions was a big deal for me. Really.
Oh, yeah, starting with Jonathan Seagull.
Forever, I like that one a lot. But so another area, well, a whole area that we've talked about a lot, and it relates to meditation, spiritual practice, writing, and spirituality, is the creative process itself. And one thing that fascinated me ever since even before I started meditating, when I was a musician and a writer from very young, was where do ideas come from? What gives us the ability to come up with something original or beautiful or something?
It's one of my favorite topics, so if you'll allow me to discourse a little bit on it. Something, let's use the word pontificate. I like that word. Tongue-in-cheek, of course. Me and you both love the movie Amadeus, right?
Oh yeah.
The story, beautiful movie, beautiful story, the story of Mozart. And Mozart, he's like one of the most unique, amazing artists of all time, because this guy started composing music on his own when he was 4 years old. 4 years old. He wrote his first symphony when he was 8. And at that time, he had already toured all of Europe, playing concerts in all the royal palaces across Europe. So he's like, the poster child for the inexplicable genius, right? And one time, somebody asked Mozart, how he composed his pieces. You know what he said? He said, I don't compose anything. These melodies just appear in my mind. And I just write them down. They just show up, it's like they drop out of the sky and I just hear them in my mind. I don't feel like I'm composing anything. I'm just transcribing what I hear, amazing, right? To use a more modern example, Antonio Carlos Jobim, he's the most famous composer of popular music in Brazil. He's dead a couple of decades. So he wrote Girl from Ipanema, and one of his most famous and greatest songs is Wave. Vou te contar, os olhos já não podem ver. Fundamental é mesmo amor, impossível ser feliz sozinho. I think he says impossível ser feliz sozinho. It's impossible to attain happiness alone. That's the last line. Beautiful melody, incredible. And they asked him about, well, how did you come up with that melody? He said, I didn't. It just appeared in my mind one day, fully formed. I was just sitting one day and it just appeared, like it dropped into my lap, and all I did was write it down. Basically the same thing with Mozart.
Yeah.
So the question is, where do these like this creative inspiration, where do these ideas come from? And it's not confined only to artists. If you think about Mendeleev, who the periodic table.
Yeah, that's it.
It was in a dream. It just came fully formed. He woke up out of his dream and quickly wrote down. It just appeared to him. So where do these come from? For me, after more than 40 years of meditation, and all the studies we've done of yogic practice, for me, this is a perfectly natural and easily explained phenomenon. It's rare and extremely admirable, but it's perfectly natural and it's very easily explained according to yogic theory. So, in Western psychology, we'll call this yogic psychology, but in Western psychology, we have the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, and we're all pretty much aware of what those mean. But in yogic psychology, there's the deepest layer of the mind is often called the superconscious mind, or sometimes the unconscious, but superconscious is a much better word. And in the superconscious mind, we find the paranormal powers of the mind, like clairvoyance, clairaudience, and all these things that seem, some people don't even believe they exist, but of course they do, right? And in yoga, it's also said that the superconscious mind is the repository of all knowledge and the repository of creativity. The seed of creativity is in the superconscious mind. As an aside, most people in the West are familiar with Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious, right? Well, Carl Jung was a voracious reader of yogic texts and yogic philosophy and Indian texts. And I'm dead sure that he borrowed his idea of the collective unconscious from the yogic explanations of the superconscious mind. And the thing about the superconscious mind is that it's not individual. I don't have my superconscious mind and you have yours. There's only one superconscious mind that each individual, if they're able to open up a conduit into it, can tap in to that infinite source of knowledge and creativity. There was one Christian philosopher, Teilhard de Chardin, French, and I think he had the same idea, and he called it, I believe, the noosphere. Right? In Buddhism, it's called the universal mind, right? And that it is the source of everything. And really, this universal mind, or superconscious mind, is creativity incarnate. Because what is the source? Look out your window. I don't know if you have a window in front of you, but looking at this incredible sky and these trees and this planet, and there's human beings walking by, and the human beings create cars and they write books and do all these things, And when the night falls, you have stars and planets whirling in the orbits. It's not for nothing that this is called the creation. Mm-hmm. And it's not for nothing that there is a creator, right? And that creator of this creation, in yoga we call it the cosmic mind, in Buddhism the universal mind, And that is the source of, that is true creativity, the creation itself, Nothing that any artist can create can compare to what we see when we open our eyes each morning, right? That is creativity incarnate. So this, what the yogis say to explain what happens with these amazing artists like Mozart, is that they're born with an innate, kind of like an open conduit to, it's like a direct line to the cosmic mind, right? They have this open channel, and what creates those melodies is that creative energy from the cosmic mind coming into their subconscious mind or their conscious mind. And then, like Mozart, they write it down. And we all get to enjoy it, right?
Reminds me of the Greeks, the ancient Greeks. They talked about the muses. So they kind of they were the embodiment of different types of creativity, and each had
a symbolic explanation of the same phenomenon, right? A poetic, I'll call it a poetic explanation of the same phenomenon. So, Anandamurti, our guru, he talks about the difference between genius and technician. He's talking specifically about artists. A genius is somebody who's born with this, he has this inborn faculty, this inborn connection to the cosmic mind already open. And that's the Mozarts, the Beethovens, the Shakespeares, the Picassos, and you really can't explain their creativity unless you know something about the higher levels of mind. And then, you can explain it. While the rest of us who are playing at being writers or playing at being musicians, right? He calls those technicians. Why? Because a technician is someone who takes an ordinary faculty and through hard work and perseverance over a number of years, they can develop it into an extraordinary faculty. So through hard work, we can eventually become really good writers or really good musicians. But a Mozart, he was born with that. Shakespeare, he was just born with that. And none of us are going to be geniuses. But the most interesting thing about his discussion on genius and technician, he says that, but through sadhana, through meditation, through spiritual practices, if you can develop the ability to access the cosmic mind, normally it's temporarily, then you gain access for those few moments, that time when you're in deep meditation or other times that you access it, you get access to that infinite storehouse of knowledge and creativity. And that's what happens we see incarnate in great spiritual teachers. They're able to guide their disciples unerringly down the path because they have the knowledge of the entire universe, the past, present, and future is an open book to them. Okay, but that's not going to happen to us. It's not in the immediate present. But if through our meditation, through our spiritual practice, we gradually expand our minds, we can start to gain access to that source of creativity. And that's when great things can happen for an artist or for a scientist or for an educator and for anyone. Normally, Baba talks about this, normal people, they have maybe some flash comes from that superconscious mind 1, 2, 3 times in life. It may be a simple thing, you have a feeling that, oh, this person is about to call, and all of a sudden the phone rings and it's him. Where does that come from? That comes from the superconscious mind. And it may happen because you have a moment of relative calm or concentration. For some reason, you have a flash. Or, you've heard of people who have a premonition, suddenly a premonition that something's happened to somebody that I know, a relative or something. And then they find out the next day that the same exact moment they had that premonition, that relative was in a car accident.
I've had stuff like that happen to me quite.
Yeah, most of us have at least once or twice. And of course, people who meditate, this starts happening a lot more often. As we get closer to gaining access to the superconscious mind. So my ideal as an artist, as a spiritual artist, is to slowly try to open up that channel so that that some spark, some tiny spark of that universal creative energy can flow through me and into my art. Mozart, you listen to the clarinet quintet, and it's like this amazing piece of music. And we celebrate him as this amazing composer. But really, we should be celebrating the true source of the clarinet quintet, which is the superconscious mind, supreme consciousness. It's like Mozart was a flute that the cosmic mind picked up and blew through. And we heard that music. Let's give all respect to the flute, but in the end, it's the flautist that makes the music. And the flautist is the cosmic mind, that the thought of God that expresses itself in this world through a Mozart, through a Beethoven, and through a Dadananda Nilananda at times.
Or even David. I have to say, your books are getting better. You know, you've done a lot of work.
Yeah, I'm putting in the time, but the time that I put in meditating is even more important, because again, you know, I can become a really good technician, you know, but it's the old thing that Bob also talks about. You know, you may develop the language ability to say things really well, but what really matters is, do you have something to say? And that comes from gaining wisdom, that comes from the awakening of our own consciousness, and that devolves upon our spiritual practice. The better we become in spiritual practice, the more that our consciousness awakens, the more we have something to give. The writing is just a medium, the music is just a medium. For a scientist, it's the science. For an educator, it's the education. But something has to come through us. And so that's really the focus of my writing. I work at it to become a better technician, but you know, my ultimate goal is to gain access to the superconscious mind, so something really cool can appear in words. You know? Well,
the new book is the coolest yet, I think, apart from the biography of Anandamurti, obviously, but it's inspired me to want to go to India again, because you're writing about these, you know.
Well, you know,
I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to probably Bodh Gaya and Anandanagar.
Yeah, I mean, India is the creator of spirituality on our planet. I remember once talking to Dada Chandanath, about why all these great saints incarnated in India, and so few outside India. And said, well, I mean, it's just natural. It's where spirituality started. So it's only natural that it's still concentrated there to a great extent. It's like, and if you want to learn it, the best place to go is India if you want to learn spirituality. If you want to learn how to play samba, go to Brazil. You can learn how to play samba in Nigeria or in France, but it's not the same, because you go to Brazil and there's everybody plays samba. It's kids, I've seen kids 3 years old dancing samba like you can't believe, because it's in the air and it's in the water. It's rooted in the culture. And
you want to start a software company, you come to Silicon Valley. You want to become a hobbit, you go to New Zealand.
Yeah, either that or Middle Earth.
Same place.
Right. But the cradle of spirituality, and the place that it is still, that vibration is still strong, is the place where Krishna walked, where Shiva walked, where Ramakrishna and Vivekananda walked, where you can go to the Bo tree where Buddha attained enlightenment and meditate there. And 2,600 years after he left his body, you can still feel the vibration. So that's the magic of India, and India is still full of saints. It's still the land of saints. It's the land of a whole lot of other things, both good and bad. But that jewel of spirituality shines brightest on planet Earth in India. Eventually, it's gonna, that it will radiate the entire globe to the point that there is no more center of spirituality on Earth. But that's still probably millennia in the future. For now, India is the land of the saints. And that's what Elijah discovered when he hung out there for more than 20 years, as if you read the book, you'll find out. And when I first went to India, I went to meet my guru, Anandamurti. And it was like this amazing, mind-blowing experience. I arrived there at 20 years old. Well, I don't have time to tell some of the stories.
We kind of got to wind up now, but
yeah, but it was mind-blowing. But I also got a chance to travel around and meet other saints. Like I hung out with Anandamayi Ma. In 1980, I remember for a week, I was, with her most of the time, and it was incredible, So a lot of my experiences meeting not just my guru, but other gurus in India at that time, and some of the characters in this book, like Chikananda, Krishnananda, and Chidananda in Rishikesh, and Mother Meera, and these kind of people, come from those days in the late 70s and the beginning of the 80s when I was living in India, and getting blown away by this spiritual tradition that's been, is over 7,000 years old in that land.
So I think it's a book worth celebrating, and you're launching it next week. Is that right?
Monday, yeah.
Okay. So we'll when we send out the replay of this, we'll add a link where people can get the book at some on Amazon or whatever it is, some special thing.
What time is it? Oh, wow, it's already after 7. So I guess we probably don't have time to take questions, right?
No, I don't think we do. But we'll we can revisit this. We've got a lot more to explore. I mean, I really like this, what you were saying about the whole sort of narrative thing. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
This is really, really interesting. Cool.
Okay, well, for any listeners who are still there, come back next time if you have some questions, or write me. You can go onto my website and
Inner World Publications.com
or devashishs.com, either one. You can get my email address, write me, I'll write you back. And I get letters from time to time from people who read my books, and it's always cool to be able to engage in conversations. Like I got one letter from a guy, I don't know who he is, in Sweden. He's a teacher, and he just read the Jazzmaster. He's a Buddhist practitioner, and he wrote me for a list of my favorite books of spiritual fiction. I love that. I went to my library and said, "Oh yeah, you got to read this. Got to read this. Got to read this. This is amazing." And he loved that. And it just so happened that he was teaching Hermann Hesse in a high school class at the time. That I said, "Well, these are the Hermann Hesse books that blew my mind when I was young." So, if anybody's out there and you want to write me and you have any questions, feel free. I'll write you back.
Great. Maybe we'll actually get to co-writing our book about creativity at some point.
I would like that. Yeah. Hopefully, we'll be here on the planet for some time more, and we'll get the chance.
Indeed. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Same here, and I'm sure we'll be talking very, very soon again, just without the audience. Okay, namaskar.
Farewell.
Peace and love to everyone.